I'm out here hiking around in the hills of Napa. Let's go see what we can find. Saw these poking out from the forest floor. Let's take a look at these. They're kind of purplish brown. I'm pretty sure these are bluets, which has been classified as Clatosobe nuda or Lepista nuda, and just recently they've been sequenced and the DNA more closely matches Colibia, which is confusing because that's usually a mycorrhizal genus, and these tend to grow as decay mushrooms, saprobes. But they have these beautiful sort of purpley gills, and they'll also have a lilac pinkish spore print. So be careful to compare Cortinarius with bluets when you're picking them. There are no poisonous purple quartz, but they don't taste great, and there are some poisonous quartz. So just make sure you can recognize a bluet versus Clatosobe if you're going to search for these things. But these are all kind of buggy and gross. I'm not going to eat these, but they make a pretty decent mushroom cream sauce. So that's a bluet. Here's a big old white mushroom popping up under pine and Doug fir. Pretty sure this is Russula brevipies, the short-stemmed Russula. You can see it's a brittle gill because the gills break really easily. This is actually a decent edible. This is the same base mushroom that gets turned into a lobster mushroom. But yeah, nice little Russula right there. Oh, it's so peaceful, beautiful. Look how green and mossy everything is. Absolutely love it. Here, there's a couple of little marasmius mushrooms on the tree. And down here at the base, I found something interesting. Let's take a look at what this is. Pull it up. Kind of goopy and purple at this point. I'm pretty sure this is a Krugomphus, just absolutely full of maggots, but interesting purple color there. So this is a mushroom that is parasitic on Swillus, but right here it's just getting eaten up by bugs. Technically, you can eat these when they're in better shape. Here's some old nasty Matsutake that a forager clearly found because they cut it in half to look for bugs and then decided to leave it. But at least it's still here in the woods. So I'm looking around in tan oak habitat, and I saw, I'm pretty sure there's a Lactarius right here. Pick it up. So you can see the yellow latex. So I know this is Xanthogalactus. This is sort of a lookalike for the candy caps, but it's got yellow staining stuff, which means it'll make you sick if you try to eat it. It's also pretty spicy. Speaking of spicy, we have a red Russula over here. So there's another brittle gill. It's kind of buggy, but it's a red one, and usually those cause severe GI upset, so I'll just leave that behind. Here's some tan oak that's got some stearium growing on it, and wherever you see stearium, you'll pretty much always see Nematelia, witch's butter, jelly, which is parasitizing the mycelium of this stuff. So that's a pretty common sight here, and all this makes a nice little jiggly jelly noise. Another thing you'll tend to see on tan oak is a lot of this weird black goopy jelly stuff called poor man's jelly drops, or Bulgaria inoquans. It's an endophytic ascomyce that lives inside of the tan oak, and when the tree dies, it starts fruiting all over the wood. So look at it, it's just everywhere. That is pretty cool, even all the way down there. Wow, that's a lot of black bulgur. So, not edible. Unlike a lot of jelly fungi, I would not recommend trying to eat this, especially not raw. But it is pretty cool. And it's an interesting, like, jelly texture, you know? Just look at this stuff. Woo! Very weird. I was walking along, I saw this orange stuff. My first thought was, wow, careless hikers just dumped orange peels on the ground. But on closer inspection, this is the orange peel cup fungus. There's a lot of it all over the place here. Whoops. So it's an ascomycete cup fungi. So I'm pretty sure if I blow into it, it'll do something kind of special. Check this out. Yep, there go the spores. So all of these cups are just loaded with spores that they're ready to shoot out in response to a change in air pressure. So these things are probably growing separate perfectly. Decay mushrooms all over the ground, but a whole bunch of them. They're kind of nasty, but they're absolutely all over the place. All those little pieces of orange are the orange peel cup fungus Alluria. Here's a chunk of tan oak that's dying, and it's covered in little things that kind of look like oyster mushrooms. But I want to show you these because these are Crepidotus. They're look-alike for oysters. They're generally much smaller, and they don't have a true stem or stipe, but they do have this sort of pluteroid oyster mushroom-like appearance, so people mistake them and think that they're oyster mushrooms. They're not toxic, but they're not particularly tasty either. So there is Crepidotus. There's also a little chunk of cramp ball, and Nullus hypoxylon here, which is another endophyte that grows on tan oak. So it's another thing you'll see on tan oaks as they are dead and dying. So I'm a little sad as I walk around here because they've been doing a lot of sort of forest management, which means they've been cutting down a lot of the trees out here. So there's just like big piles of duff and junk all over the place. And I'm not finding as many mushrooms because the forest floor is all torn up, but it is for a good purpose, because the reason they're doing this stuff is sort of habitat management and fire prevention. And, you know, it's probably better to let it burn, but this is an area that's super fire prone. And if we do have a big fire up here, it would probably rage out of control and burn a bunch of houses and vineyards, and they're not gonna let that happen. So what they've been doing instead is just taking down a good portion of the forest and leaving the big mature madrones and tan oak and occasionally the Doug fir. So I don't love it, and I'm hoping this habitat will come back in a year or two. But for now, at least they're doing something. Here's an interesting mushroom. This is a Gyromitra, or sometimes it's called a false morel, or I like the word lorchel better to describe these. And it's another ascomycete, so it's sort of like morel, but, you know, looks very different, to be quite clear. Very dark stem, sort of weird invaginated brown cap. These are fairly toxic. They contain gyromitrin, which breaks down into our bodies to monomethylhydrazine, which is a neurotoxin, and you don't want to eat these. In Europe, some people will like double boil them, but I do not recommend that, since even that has its own risks. But this is usually popping up once trees have been taken down. So here's a bunch of tan oak and maybe some pine that got chopped down, and at the base I'm gonna find these Gyromitra, and they're just everywhere right now because of all the trees they've been taking down up here. Whoa, check out this big decaying tan oak log. There's a whole bunch of Hericin corloides, the coral tooth, a relative of the lion's mane. Reach in here, see if I can pull some out. Pretty wet, but it's still pretty clean. Looks good. It's more toothy and has a more open structure than lion's mane, but tastes very similar. And it's a really awesome edible mushroom you can make sort of vegan, vegetarian crab cakes with. So good to find some Hericin corloides. Hericin corloides, coral tooth. Ooh, what's this? Ooh, this is a rosy Gomphidius. It's very slimy, as you can see. Has this yellow foot on it. And this is another thing that is parasitic on Swillis. So the Swillis aren't here now. They fruited earlier in the year, but these little slimy boys are down here in the duff. You can technically eat these, but they're pretty slimy and they turn black when you cook them. So there's a young one, there's a mature one. This is Gomphidius rosaceus. Ooh, what do I have down here? I see some gills kind of coming up from the ground, and those little ridges tell me I think that this is a white chanterelle. So let's take a look. Ooh, yeah. This is Cantharellus subalbidus. Beautiful, meaty white chanterelle. That is awesome. It's gonna be real tasty. Here's a whole bunch of fuzzy orange stuff that's really stinky. This is the stinking mock oyster, Phylotopsis nidulans, and it smells like sewer gas or farts, H2S, hydrogen sulfide. It's not an edible mushroom, but you'll see it pretty commonly, and it is really pretty, and you always think you can eat it because it is beautiful, but it's really, really tough, and it smells literally like farts. This mushroom smells awful. I gotta get away from here because it stinks. Whew. Here's a log with a whole bunch of turkey tail, Trametes versicolor. So I can tell this bird from Styrium because they'll have little white pores underneath. You can show these really distinct bands of growth. But what gorgeous turkey tails. There's some really young nascent ones that are still growing. One that's just covered in gutatation, little droplets. The turkey tails go all the way down this log. Don't let anyone ever tell you that these are really expensive. They're not. They're incredibly common. They're really easy to harvest, and if you want, you can get them and powder them or make tea out of them. But some turkey tails or Trametes versicolor. here's a bunch of dead sticks, and growing on it is a whole bunch of xylaria. So this is another ascomycete that starts out as an endophyte inside of the plant, and when the tree dies, it starts growing. So early on, it produces these sort of white spindles and covered in spores. So those are ascospores, but they're conidia, asexual spores that are just doubling down on its current habitat. And then later in the season, it develops these harder black fruiting bodies that are more knobby. And so initially it's these white things and then these black knobs. And it's the same organism. It's just these are asexual spores and then these are long-lived sexual spores. So a lot of ascomycetes do this, where they start out with asexual and then move to sexual spores. So that's xylaria, dead man's finger, or candle snuff fungi is another name for it.
Wow, look at all this insect egg slime mold. That is so much Leocarpus fragilis. Holy cow.
So this bright yellow orangey cluster here is sulfur tufts or Hypholoma fasciculare. These are very bitter, very toxic mushrooms. But I want to show you something really cool that they do. Is they glow under UV, so they fluoresce, which is pretty awesome. So here you go, some glowing sulfur tufts growing here on this big dead log. Wow, look at how many Amanita muscaria are here. This is crazy. I got one up there, one there, one there, little one there, blown out one there, a couple of nice ones right there, big one, someone turned over, two down there, two little ones here. I got two down the slope, more over there. This is an area where they're just cutting down all the trees, and I'm afraid that they're cutting them all down because what's gonna happen to our little muscaria friends? They're so pretty. Ooh, look at this. This is a Lactarius, I'm pretty sure. This is Lactarius rubellacteus. It's associated with Doug fir. It's kind of related to the saffron milkcap, Lactarius deliciosus, except this is a little more reddish orange. It does stain green when it gets older, and if I break it, you can see that the latex color here is a more sort of orangey purple color as opposed to bright orange of the deliciosus. But this one associates with Doug fir. It's a pretty decent edible, but it's a little grainy, so I like to roast it really hard at about 400 degrees for 20 minutes. But yeah, Lactarius rubellacteus, pretty cool. Whoa, check this out. Here's some coral tooth slime, Ceratamixa. That's pretty cool looking. Awesome little slime molds. This stuff doesn't form plasmodium. It's not an acellular myxomycete, but it does make really cool little sporangia that look like white coral. There's a whole bunch more of it right over here. That's neat. Gosh, look at all of this black bulgur. There's just so much of it out here, and it's so squishy, jelly-y. Huge, huge lumps of it. Ooh. Ooh, check out this little jelly boy. This is a cat's tongue or pseudohydnum. So it's growing saprotrophically in this Doug fir duff, and it's got little tiny teeth underneath, which you can't see super well, but they're there, you know, little tiny teeth. This is edible. I like to candy it and sometimes pickle it or put it into cold salads as a little fun texture element. So a cat's tongue pseudohydnum, fun little jelly thing. Look at it. It's getting dark out here, but I have one last final thing I want to do. I have this little piece of hericium that I'm going to plant kind of just in here and hope that maybe it'll go ahead and grow into this wood and fruit in the future. And I was looking at this and someone stashed their coffee cup in here. So I'm going to take this and throw it out where it belongs, in the trash, and leave that in the woods. So it's been a good day of foraging. Time to head home. And one last little look at that hericium there in an oak tree.